All right, this is Citizenship and Immigration Attorney Parviz Malakouti. Today is October 13th, 2025, and this is our 41st Mobility Space. Today we're talking about the Roger Ver case, which apparently news has broken, has just settled. So as a reminder, this is Mobility Space number 41 of our 50 Mobility Spaces that we're doing this year on the hottest topics in dual citizenship, freedom of movement, and of course, sovereignty and passports. Reminder to anybody who wants to participate, if you want to speak, all you have to do is hit the request button and I will approve it right away. So Roger Ver, the saga of Roger Ver is one that we've been following throughout these spaces, not every space, but he's come up in at least 5 to 10 of them. And news broke on October 9th, so just last week, that apparently the case had settled. I'm not sure who broke the news, but I first came across it by a New York Times article. And then, of course, there's a spate of articles discussing the news as well after the fact. So just as a reminder for the regarding the Roger Ver case, Roger Ver is an entrepreneur, a very early adopter of Bitcoin, who became a billionaire. He was a U.S. citizen. He renounced U.S. citizenship in 2014. And in 2024, he was charged by the U.S. Department of Justice and arrested in Spain on a number of charges related to income tax returns that he had filed previously. He was charged with 3 counts of mail fraud, 2 counts of tax evasion, 3 counts of false statement under penalty of perjury. And since he was arrested in Spain, he's been fighting his extradition to the United States. Those charges, as I understand it, amount to potential maximum sentence of over 100 years. In December of last year, Roger Ver's lawyers filed a motion to dismiss. The DOJ opposed it in January. Ver filed his reply in late January. And then the case has kind of been frozen since then. Okay, so there was initially a hearing date to argue the motion to dismiss in February of this year, February of 2025. And then one after another, there were stipulations, joint stipulations by the parties to continue the matter. And in those stipulations filed with the court, each time what was discussed or what was basically referenced as the reason for the stipulation was to give time to Ver's new attorneys. Ver switched attorneys early in the year, early in 2025, to give the new attorneys time to catch up to the case and to discuss issues related to the motion to dismiss. So there was one stip to continue, a second, a third, a fourth, a fifth, a sixth. Okay, which was just recently filed. I think it was last month. Excuse me. I think it was in October. Actually, it was the very beginning of October, October 2nd, I believe. And I and a number of other people, John Richardson, others that were following this case, David Lesperance, have been speculating pretty early on that the motions, the stipulations were not just to discuss the motion to dismiss, but that talks of settlement were in the works. Lo and behold, fast forward to last week, October 9th, and the news breaks that apparently Ver has settled, or at least there's a tentative agreement in place for $48 million, a deferred prosecution agreement, $48 million payment, and then dismissal of all the charges if Roger Ver meets the terms. Now, I've checked Pacer. I checked Pacer 2 days ago on Saturday. I checked Pacer again this morning. There's no paperwork filed with Pacer yet with regards to the settlement. So there's probably terms in place, but as far as I can tell, nothing official has been filed yet with regards to the settlement. So we want to talk about this today. What does this mean? What was this case about? And what does the settlement mean as far as if you're a Bitcoiner, if you're a U.S. citizen, if you're somebody that's curious about renunciation? And I found this case so interesting because the case was a perfect intersection of Bitcoin, U.S. citizenship / renunciation, and tax, specifically exit tax. These are 3 really hot topics, and this case wove in all 3 of those topics. And these are topics that are not just hot now, but I would say growing. Actually, there's more curiosity surrounding renunciation of U.S. citizenship, and of course, Bitcoin continues to grow and grow, both in market cap as well as adoption. And so this case was really interesting because there was a number of issues that were raised both in the charging documents and then, of course, in Roger Ver's motion to dismiss. And given the fact that Roger Ver is so wealthy, he's so well heeled, I believed that this case really had the potential to go far in the judicial system and to really shed a big spotlight on some of these issues. Some of the most interesting. So I'll just read a couple of the interesting topics, questions that I thought the Roger Ver case rose, which brought it in the public consciousness. But we're not going to get these to see these claims tested judicially. The first one, probably the one that was most interesting to me as a U.S. citizenship and immigration lawyer, was Ver's argument in his motion to dismiss that because the right to expatriate is a fundamental right, a substantial restriction on that right is subject to strict scrutiny and may only survive if narrowly tailored to promote a compelling government interest. That argument was saying that the right to expatriate from the United States is fundamental. The imposition of an exit tax on renouncing U.S. citizens is a substantial restriction, and that exit tax would not meet strict scrutiny. Okay, so that's the argument. We're not going to get to see that tested, at least not judicially, unfortunately, right? So that was the claim that was most interesting to me. Okay, and then there was another claim from Ver's motion to dismiss, which is that the exit tax is an unapportioned, direct and not exempted by the 16th Amendment. And so we obviously won't get to see that tested either. There's also another interesting aspect to this, which is what does this settlement signal to the crypto and Bitcoin community? Trump has been shown or presented as the most Bitcoin friendly, crypto friendly president. Is this more evidence of that? Do we think that do we think the Ver case personally caught the attention of Trump? Do you think he may have put his thumb on the scales of the settlement? I'm not sure, but I would love to discuss it and see what other people think about it. So anyway, I've been going for about 10 minutes. That's an introduction to the case. We got David here. We got John Richardson. We got Scott here, Scott Lang. I'll throw out my first question to David, if you can speak, David. And this is, exit tax, Bitcoin, renunciation of U.S. citizenship, right? 3 hot topics, David. What do you think is the aspect of the Ver case that is or was most personally interesting to U.S. citizens, to people in the United States? And what do you think about this settlement? Is this a good settlement? If you're Roger Ver, do you think he jumped to sign these settlement documents?
I really wish they had a chance to fully litigate this and get some opinions from the court on these issues. It's hard to. It's a perfect confluence of all of those aspects that really would have been illustrative and helpful for folks who might be in similar situations. So I don't think that there's a single one. I think that the fact that they all came together into a single case really made this unusually interesting, and I'm a bit disappointed that it's being settled.
Yeah, exactly. Same here. I mean, selfishly disappointed. Of course, happy for Roger Ver. I'm sure this is an enormous relief for him. It's scary for anybody, no matter how well-heeled you are, to be facing possible 100 plus years in prison. And remember, we had a different president, right? When when Roger Ver was charged, right? This happened in 2024 and before the presidential election in 2024. So not only did we have a different president, but the elections had not happened yet, right? So if you're Roger Ver being charged under the Biden DOJ, right? I gotta think he's thinking there's a serious possibility that he's going to do hard time, right? And then lo and behold, obviously Trump was elected in November and then takes office in January. And then we see a different posture, right? We see the case just be kind of frozen since the motion to dismiss was filed by Roger Ver in December, and just continuance after continuance. So happy for Roger Ver. Selfishly, didn't get to see this case, float up, to will obviously get its treatment in federal district court and then possibly be appealed up to a circuit and then possibly even go up to the Supreme Court. So definitely agree with you there. We got Jay there. Jay, I'm inviting you to speak. No pressure, but you can speak if you like there. I think so. I'm going to answer my own question that I threw out to you, David. I think for U.S. citizens, the aspect that's most interesting is probably this on a numbers basis, probably this Bitcoin evaluation question. And then if you're a U.S. citizen, if you're kind of in the realm of kind of what we operate in these spaces, like mobily minded individuals, people who are interested in multiple citizenship, online entrepreneurs, remote work, those people are curious about renunciation, even if they don't want to renounce U.S. citizenship, right? I think a lot of Americans that live part of the year outside the United States, at least, if not more, they always have in the back of their mind, a lot of them, what could renunciation look like in the future? And hand in hand with that question is the question of the exit tax, right? If these people are covered expatriates. And so for those people, a possible challenge to the constitutionality of the exit tax, that would have been absolutely game changing for them in terms of their calculus of how or if they decide to renounce U.S. citizenship. Okay, we got John here, we got Scott here, we got David here. Jay, what did you think when you heard about the news of settlement? What's the first thing that came to your mind?
The first thing that came to mind for me was that Roger Ver, by settling here, he's avoiding potentially many decades, the rest of his life in prison. So there are definitely huge concerns for him that would make it incredibly costly to try to take this to court.
Yeah, absolutely. On a personal level, you hear $48 million, and obviously we do have our idea about how fair the exit tax is, how legal the exit tax is. But if you're worth over $1 billion, you're facing multiple decades in prison, and you get to avoid any time just by, and it's being reported. The only term that I see being reported, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong, or if somebody saw another term, the only term that I've seen being reported is payment of the $48 million. If that's actually the term, then yeah, I got to think that Ver was jumping for a pen to sign this agreement. Okay, anyway, yeah, so there was, circling back to the facts of the case, and by the way, the journalist Taylor Hudak had an excellent long form article about the timeline. It wasn't about the timeline of the Roger Ver case. It was about the greater case, but it included a phenomenal timeline, easy to read with charts. That's something I recommend if anybody's interested. John Richardson, who's here, had a number of his own podcasts talking about the Ver case. IRS Medic, they had a number of deep dive episodes talking about the case. There's so many aspects of the case. We're only talking about kind of the headline terms. But also there was the question of extradition, right? Extradition from Spain. As I understand it, Ver also filed a complaint with the European Court of Justice with regards to Spain's acquiescence to his extradition. There was, you get an international case with a defendant like Roger Ver. Obviously, he's going to fight on all fronts, and so there's so many interesting fronts to this case, and unfortunately, we won't get to see them resolve. But Ver obviously gets to put this to bed, and obviously not have to claim or not have to be afraid of facing multiple decades in prison. I wonder if he's ever going to try to visit the United States after this. Does this make him want to live the rest of his life outside the U.S. without even visiting, or does he ever try to come back and at least for a weekend? I don't know, but these are the things that come to my mind. And yeah, I don't know if I don't know if a high profile case being filed and then settled acts as any type of what's the word? I'm drawing a blank here.
Deterrent?
Any type of deterrence? Excuse me. Yeah, deterrence to the U.S. Department of Justice to try to go after a person in a similar situation. I would guess probably not. But DOJ filing a big high profile case, fighting like cats and dogs to get somebody back to the United States, and then settling with just a financial settlement and no prison time, no jail time. I don't know. Is that from an optics perspective? Do we think that's is that positive for the DOJ? Is that negative? Is it neutral? Anybody have any thought on that?
I do. So I think part of this might be sort of the changed administration, that making an example out of somebody like Roger Ver might not no longer be a priority for the Trump people as it was maybe for the Biden folks prior to the election.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's pure speculation on my point, but I tend to agree 100%. Trump spoke at the Bitcoin conference last year when he was running for president, right? Roger Ver. Now, for those who don't know that are not hardcore in the Bitcoin community, he's actually a really divisive character inside the Bitcoiner community. It's not like the Bitcoiner community is absolutely unified, behind him, and he's a cause célèbre, as was the case, for example, with Ross Ulbricht, right? The founder of Silk Road, who spent over 10 years in prison. Ver's not like that. In fact, I would say he's even possibly reviled among Bitcoin maximalists. But he does have some people that are big supporters of his, and even some of the people who actually revile him for kind of his role within Bitcoin. Still, a lot of those kind of are they still kind of supported him. His release and charges being dropped against him, because even if they dislike him, they might look at DOJ trying to charge him and extract money from him 11 years after he announced citizenship as the greater evil, quote unquote, right? But yeah, there's a controversial figure within even Bitcoin. But if you're the Trump president and sorry, not the Trump president, if you're quote unquote the Bitcoin president, the crypto president, I would think that resolving the Ver case without Ver going to prison for decades would be considered a dub for Trump. All right, you're live there, Alex. Welcome. All right, we got Alex. Alex, you're welcome to speak. Jay, David, Patrick, I'm making you a speaker as well in case you want to speak. Um, Question for you, Alex. Same thing I asked Jay. What were your thoughts when you first heard about the Ver settlement, and what do you think about the headline terms of the settlement of the settlement? $48 million that Ver has to pay. He gets a deferred prosecution agreement, and apparently no jail time or no prison time. Is that positive or negative for Ver? Is that positive or negative for the greater community? So Bitcoiners, U.S. citizens, people who are possibly concerned about a future exit tax if they want to renounce U.S. citizenship in the future.
I see this as overall pretty positive case, in that there was potential that he spend the rest of his life in prison, and so that didn't happen is positive. I think he has a lot of money, and thus, although it's a large amount that he has to pay, it's good news overall. So I think it's a positive result, and I suspect that he's happy with it as well. One thing that I was wondering is if the case discussed his citizenships, which citizenships he had. Was that mentioned inside the case file at all from your readings?
Sorry. Yeah, it was. St. Kitts was mentioned in. I know it. I know at least one document that I read. I think it was the government's opposition to Ver's motion to dismiss that references Ver having St. Kitts citizenship. I don't think I read about any other citizenships though.
Yeah, because he has multiple citizenships, and I was wondering if that factored into the case, from the extradition to the claims they make against him as, for example, potential flight risk. I know it's been said in the past that people having multiple citizenships might make them a flight risk, even though it's unclear why that's the case. The government has sometimes asserted things like that, so I'm wondering how that played in Roger Vere's case, because he's one of the most famous CBI investors in the world, arguably.
Yeah, great point. And I didn't read the extradition documents, paperwork filed in Spain to see whether their citizenships were cited in support of extradition. I'm pretty much with you, Alex. I would presume that they were. I would guess, as a matter of course, that's going to be mentioned by the U.S. government in support of why Ver should be extradited.
And I also wonder if a case like this would force someone to disclose all of their citizenships, because if you increasingly there's procedures which require disclosure, such as many of the ETA type applications, they require disclosure of citizenships as well. And so it seems that this is going to become a increasingly mandatory thing for people to do, whether they want to or not, both from needing to travel or perhaps unwillingly in the case of Roger.
Yeah, I agree. It does seem like as multiple citizenship becomes more mainstream, there are more forms that ask you to disclose your citizenships. Key to your decision of how to fill out those forms is what's the consequence for not disclosing the citizenship. If you're given an order from a court to do so, or if you're signing something under penalty of perjury, right, that's one standard. But if you're signing something, that the consequence of which, the consequence for which omitting a citizenship would be just that, for example, the application is denied, or possibly you incur a penalty of not being able to enter a country for a period of certain number of years. That's a different sized cudgel, right, for failing to disclose that citizenship. But yeah, I tend to agree. The more we're seeing more forms, it seems like, that are asking for disclosure of multiple citizenship. We got Patrick on the line here. Patrick, what were your thoughts about the settlement when you first heard the news, and what do you think about this Ver case with regards to Bitcoin, the intersection of Bitcoin, renunciation, tax? Are you happy? Are you more happy for Ver that this settled, or would you have liked to see this case go further?
I think I would have preferred to see this case go a little further, only for so there's like two levers with this case, right? It's like transparency and standards, and then the other piece is like personal victories, right? So in this case, I think the federal government presumably says, look, Vares is out of prison, so we don't get that win, but we set the standard because he's paying us the difference in, you know, the alleged value of his crypto at the time of with his exit tax. So I think from the perspective of the government, if you don't put someone in prison, you're still asserting a standard for the future, and I think that's a win for the government. And even though we might not like the idea of there being taxes imposed, particularly in an exit tax scenario, at the very least, it's a standard, right? That you can look at in the future and use as precedence. But I don't necessarily think it's a win for Vares, because it's a tie for Vares, right? Because he stays out of prison. But from my understanding, the settlement, I believe it was $48 million, $42 million, $48 million, is the difference he would have paid anyways on that exit tax. And so we don't really get the in the weeds understanding of how an asset like crypto is valued at a time of exit tax. I don't know if and that's the part I think I'm a little unclear about, because from my understanding, he prepared his financial position such that this wouldn't happen, and it still happened. And I wonder if there is an element of him, settling so that he stays out of prison, but thereby not fighting it, creating a win for advocates of crypto value as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, we can't we can't selfishly say, oh, hey, you should have stayed in it, avoid settlement to litigate this all the way up to the Supreme Court so that the rest of us have clarity. I mean, obviously his life is on the line here. In sales, there's this concept of price anchoring, right? You first quote somebody $5,000, and then when you drop down the price to 2,000, they say, "Wow, I'm getting a great deal." When really the actual value of the thing might be only 1,000 or 500. And obviously, we have the similar concept in charging, right? People get charges stacked against them by prosecution, right? Charge somebody with everything under the sun that you could make even a colorable claim that they've violated, right? And so they feel happy, they feel vindicated when they only plead to one or two charges, right? The fact that he was charged with all of these things and facing potential max prison up to 100 plus years isn't necessarily indicative, right, that he actually violated all of those laws, right? So but the fact remains. I mean, obviously, it's very difficult to fight federal prosecution, federal law enforcement. It's difficult, it's painful, it's risky, and so yeah, I obviously don't blame him. I would expect him to both fight like cats and dogs judicially, as well as pursuing settlement through whatever means necessary. There was also reporting from a month or two ago that Ver had hired Roger Stone, I think, to try to gain access to Trump to basically win either a pardon or settlement or something like that. So Ver is doing exactly what we would expect somebody to do in this situation, which is to try to pursue a solution at all levels or any level that he could get it at. Inverted, welcome. What do you think, Inverted, about the Ver case or the settlement?
Yeah, I'm certainly not surprised that he settled. Does someone know, I think he had renounced, if I'm recalling correctly, and please feel free to correct me. He renounced on a CBI passport, but I remember he was living in Japan or something at the time. Did he actually does anyone know, does he end up naturalizing anywhere that isn't a CBI country? Because I was just thinking that, like, okay, settlement or not, I hope he has some, more on the up and up developed world citizenship at this point, because having that on your record doesn't exactly help things if he doesn't.
Yeah, so I'll just read from the government's opposition to Ver's motion to dismiss. It says in February 2014, Ver obtained citizenship in St. Kitts and renounced his U.S. citizenship a month later. To answer your question, Inverted, I don't know if Ver obtained citizenship by or any other citizenships by method other than by CBI. I haven't really dived deeply into what citizenships he has. It seems like he also has citizenship in Antigua and Barbuda by investment. I read that somewhere. I'm pretty sure I read that somewhere. Other than that, I don't know. But yeah, I mean, maybe this is what you're getting at, Inverted. Maybe there's some knock-on effects, okay, of this prosecution from the DOJ, right? Is it possible that one of these CBIs that he's gotten is going to try to reopen his case and claim that he obtained citizenship fraudulently and try to throw him under the bus as a citizen? That's actually an aspect I had not really thought about until now. That'll be something to follow.
Yeah, either that or just for his own sake and wishing him well, I hope he already has something or has started something, because it seems like they're trying to squeeze the CBI world as hard as they can, and being as much of a public figure, infamous, whatever you want to say at this point, I wouldn't want to be him if my whole identity in that sense existed around a CBI, even though I realize he's incredibly resourceful, at least financially and probably politically at this point. To Patrick's point, I do think it's kind of interesting. What does not litigating it mean? I think most clearly it just kind of means, because it seems like what really tripped him up was trying to value something that's super illiquid. It kind of says to me, it's like you effectively can't renounce unless you have this level of bankroll behind you to attempt to bail yourself out on the back end, if you have a really illiquid or hard to value net worth, which, depending on who's holding political power, they could be really obstinate and potentially ridiculous in attempting to define or attempting to value something. In Ver's case, I mean, I would have sided with him and think that they were simply trying to make an example of the Biden administration was trying to make an example, anti-crypto example of him. But nonetheless, it would have been incredibly difficult to value such a thing like Bitcoin early on. Yeah, that's my thoughts. I'm rambling a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, if you're renouncing citizenship with a net worth that's primarily in crypto or hard to value businesses, do you need to factor in a treasury for a legal challenge? Do you need to make sure you have a couple $100,000 also available to fight off the DOJ or to deal with them if they come back around? That's a great question. One other thing that I just thought about, actually, so if there's a deferred prosecution agreement, I presume that means Ver is going to have to admit culpability for something. I'm very curious to know, what is the period of time? What's the period of during which Ver is going to have to admit culpability for his actions? And if it's before he obtained the St. Kitts citizenship, right? I would think that St. Kitts citizenship is going to be in jeopardy, right? If St. Kitts wants to look at renunciation. Go ahead.
Doesn't it almost kind of have to be, given that they are so under the spotlight right now? If they were to let that go, I mean, that's just handing the U.S. a hammer to whack them with,
Maybe,
at least potentially.
maybe. But I mean, what if the terms of the settlement specifically reference Ver's conduct after he obtained St. Kitts citizenship? I would guess then that there's less of a case for St. Kitts, or it's going to be more difficult for St. Kitts to come back around. But if it's if Ver admits to any conduct before obtaining that St. Kitts citizenship, and I'm gonna make an educated guess. I'm gonna guess he didn't write on his St. Kitts CBI applications, "Yes, I've committed this crime for which I have not been charged yet." Right? If that's the case, then yeah, I would think that that there might be some jeopardy there for the St. Kitts citizenship. So yeah, that's another interesting thing to follow.
I'm going to jump in here with 2 points. The first one being the CBI aspect. And I would argue that there might be a counter narrative to the CBIs. I know they're under a spotlight, but their ability to market their programs, particularly to Americans, part of it is so that they are an option should you want to renounce. And within the Bitcoin community, um, CBI is definitely a tool, right? It is an avenue, it is an option. So from a marketing standpoint, you don't want to be the CBI that necessarily caves. And I think that's why you see them kind of operate with this herd mentality around pricing and around visa free access and around kind of the options that they provide potentially to the market of people who would be in for that. And keep in mind also that unfortunately this is not new for them too. I was listening to an old podcast. This is a little cringy here, but one of the guests was Dan Bilzerian, where they were grilling him on his source of funds and wild lifestyle, and they brought up his dad, who was a known was a convicted white collar criminal, and he mentioned that his dad had St. Kitts, I believe it was St. Kitts or St. Lucia, citizenship, and renounced his U.S. citizenship. So even though crypto is generationally new, the idea of white collar crimes or financial crimes being committed and CBI being an aspect of it, both either during or after, is not uniquely new as a concept. It is unique. It is new in practice, but not as a concept. That's the first point. The second point I was going to make is anytime you have any illiquid value, it's going to create potential problems, particularly if that value is taxed. And crypto is a great example of it, again, because it's so generationally new. But like you try and get around assessed value of real estate as it relates to property taxes, there's issues. Um, for a time I lived in a part of Virginia close to Washington, D.C., and they have a quote unquote property tax program, which by property they define as vehicles. So you get a tax every year based on the perceived value of your vehicle. Talk about a contentious issue because, you take a bat to the front bumper and suddenly your vehicle's worth less, right? And think about people who are renouncing. Like there's typically a lot of illiquid valuables involved. That can be anything from jewelry to art to real estate to uh, modes of transportation, vehicles, boats, stuff like that. So, the idea that, theirs was being deceptive, potentially deceptive around cryptocurrency. It's a new asset class, but foundationally, the principle, underlying principle is the same. It's that anytime that there's an illiquid valuable, you're going to run into issues when the taxman says it's worth more than you think it is.
Well, it's new, and it went up a bajillion% between when he renounced and when they potentially decided to go after him. I bet if this would have been the exact same thing, but Bitcoin would have been up 20%, I don't think he ever would have found himself in jail. Ironically.
Exactly. Patrick, I also read that Bilzerian's father has St. Kitts citizenship, and I believe Bilzerian's brother as well. And I believe Bilzerian's brother also lives on either St. Kitts or Nevis. Patrick, you raise a great point, right? Which is, CBIs don't want to be known, or they should be incentivized to not be known as somebody who throws their citizens under the bus just because of bad press. But here's the problem. 95 to 98%, I estimate, of content, online regarding these CBIs is agents selling, as well as as non-agents, let's say other mobility professionals such as myself that talk about the benefits of CBI. For there to be a disincentive for CBIs to throw their citizens under the bus if they run into legal issues, it has to be known. They have to at least fear proliferation of that behavior into the community, right? But if when a CBI acts badly or throws one of their citizens under the bus, there's just one or two small articles about it, and then nobody else talks about it. Well, then they're not realizing any punishment actually for that type of behavior, and this is something that I think, and I just posted the other day about Vanuatu. I gave mostly props, although I did kind of criticize that Vanuatu talked publicly about Andrew Tate's citizenship. But I gave Vanuatu props for resisting media pressure once the news came out that Andrew Tate had applied for Vanuatu citizenship by investment. And I'm no fan of Andrew Tate. Okay, I do not like him on a personal level, but being controversial, being whatever, or even running into criminal charges, and even a conviction for conduct that happened after a person got citizenship, I don't think should be grounds for renunciation of citizenship. I think that we as a community, right, the people in the mobility space, we need to call out CBI programs when they're trying to cave to pressure either from the media or from the U.S., the European Union, UK, or from powerful governments to try to distance themselves from citizens, their citizens, for conduct that the citizen did after they got the citizenship. Now, if the conduct was, or the alleged conduct was committed before the citizenship, and the person did not disclose that, if they had some sort of conviction or charge, they didn't disclose that, oh, okay, that's totally fine. I think it's fine to challenge their citizenship, obviously giving them due process. But to me, this is a very, very sensitive point right here. I mean, CBIs that want to go after citizenship of one of their applicants for quote unquote disrepute, bringing the country into disrepute, that type of stuff. I think that needs to be publicized and called out to create and generate that incentive to behave properly to what I consider as their customers, people who got their citizenships.
Yeah, and I'm also, I'd love to also be a fly on the wall, because it's also what the relationship is diplomatically between CBI country and the United States, because I would imagine, being a country like this size, suddenly having, the federal Department of Justice at your door, or, the State Department at the behest of the Department of Justice giving you questions, that also has a chilling effect, right? Because it's one thing to fear headlines, and I think that that's a huge aspect of it. But I think there's also like a low but noticeable like risk from a government relations perspective, where it kind of gets into the question of, how sovereign is a country if, a threat from a larger country can, change domestically instigated policy.
How much is St. Kitts or Antigua, whatever, take your pick? How much is a St. Kitts citizenship worth if they are not only banned from visa-free access, but those passport holders cannot even apply for a visa of the United States and the European Union?
That's a great question. I would, if I had to take a guess, it would be, it would be less than the current going rate, I would imagine.
Yeah, I would agree.
I don't think we're going to see a situation where CBI citizens are banned from applying for a visa en masse from certain places. I think we're probably, I could certainly see more CBIs losing their visa-free access, right? Which has already happened to some extent. Dominica lost it in the UK, and of course Vanuatu famously lost it in the Shenzhen area, But I doubt that they would say in mass. The United States here and there might include like a visa ban, but I doubt that it would happen in mass. But even if it did, for a person for a person getting a CBI, getting citizenship by investment, who keeps their first citizenship or has other citizenships as well, for them, for the CBI to actually be a liability for them, it wouldn't be sufficient just for countries to say citizens by investment from this country cannot apply for a visa on their CBI passport. They would have to take it a step further and say, if you are a person who has gotten a citizenship by investment in, let's call it St. Kitts, you cannot apply for a visa in our country with any of your citizenships, even if you're also a French citizen, even if you're also a Canadian citizen. Never say never, but that's pretty rare. I do follow these types of things, and I'm hard pressed to think of an example of, even the United States, even Trump's travel ban, okay, the quote unquote Muslim ban, both from the first administration, Presidential Proclamation 9645, as well as this most recent proclamation, June 3rd, I think, even that exempts Iranian dual citizens who are applying for the U.S. Visa with their other country of citizenship and passport, right? So you never know, never say never. But to answer your question, Inverted, definitely the value goes down of the CBI, but I don't see it going into like liability territory where it's like now you're actually in a worse position applying for a visa from certain country or zone because you got the CBI.
Yeah, makes sense.
A citizenship that is fraudulently acquired can be voided, as I understand it, by at least in most countries that I'm aware of. But is it possible that in this case, maybe the United States could have somehow voided a certificate of loss of nationality if it was perhaps obtained fraudulently? Is that ever a possibility?
We had John Richardson here, but I think he's busy because he left there. Ex post facto challenging the voluntariness, I think, or intention of a certificate of loss of nationality. I don't know. I think so. I think that can be done, but I'm speculating to a large extent. I don't know. I don't think I've read cases. I don't think I've had occasion to research that. So, you know what? I'm going to refrain from answering. I don't know.
Okay. Obviously, Title 8 and Title 26 are separate things. So if it was a case of fraud of whatever statements you may have made to the IRS for associated with the relinquishment of a citizenship, that would probably be a different matter than fraud relating to the actual relinquishment itself. So I don't know what bearing that might have on a CLN, but
I'm going to have to, that's an interesting enough point. I'm going to have to look into that, and we'll revisit that either the next space or two spaces down the line. Now, that's a great question, great issue. I want to see what the conditions are for a challenge to a certificate of loss of nationality. So yeah, thank you for that, David. Okay, we got Jay, we got Inverted, we still got Alex here. Okay, so the things to follow, I know the things I'm going to be following with the Ver case is, do we ever get to learn what the actual terms of the settlement are? So specifically something beyond just the 48 million. Two, what's going to happen with Ver's St. Kitts citizenship? Is St. Kitts going to try to distance themselves? And I don't think I've seen any, while this case was pending, I don't think I've seen any type of announcement or news from St. Kitts, regarding Roger Ver or his citizenship. So I'll be following that closely to see what happens there. And then, just one potentially interesting point is, so a deferred prosecution agreement still is going to mean that Ver is going to have a criminal record that results from this charge. He also has a conviction from California stemming from, I think it was like sale of fireworks online or something, and that's from years ago, like 20 plus years ago. So he's got a criminal record now, and it's not just one thing, right? He's going to have at least two things on his U.S. criminal record here. Is he going to go for another CBI after this? And we may never know the answer to that, but I'd be curious. I am just curious to know what is Ver going to do, if anything, to try to obtain more residencies or citizenship. Is he going to try to go for a citizenship through a more robust manner, right? And somebody brought this up. I forget, maybe it was David who brought this up, this issue of fragile citizenships, right? Fragilely acquired citizenships. And, CBIs we're seeing, can be easy come, easy go. And this is something I've been talking about for a while. And now I'm glad to see more people talking about it. Even some people that are kind of, what I would consider citizenship salesmen are begrudgingly kind of acknowledging or accepting that. And what I believe is the element that infuses robustness, generally speaking. Obviously, every country has its own laws and rules, but it's a period of residency. That's what I see as infusing, kind of the element that infuses robustness, that makes it more difficult, both legally and also practically, let's say also even culturally, to challenge somebody's citizenship, right? So being a resident, even if it's a short period of residence, okay, I think leads to a more robust citizenship, right? It's easy relatively for countries to discriminate based off of how you got your citizenship, right? And then try to claim that, we don't recognize you as a citizen of that country at all. Or let's say we don't recognize you as a citizen of that country for this particular purpose. And one example that comes to mind is the US E2 investor treaty visa. Okay, so not the EB5, but the investor visa that is non-immigrant. It doesn't come with a green card. To qualify for that, a foreign national has to be a citizen of a country that's part of the E2 treaty with the United States, E2 visa treaty. 3 years ago in 2022, the United States amended their definition of citizen of that country to basically to say that if you acquired that citizenship by investment, you have to be domiciled in that country for 3 years before, applying for the E2 treaty visa. So what they did effectively is the United States is reaching into other countries', citizenships and saying, for the purposes, if you want this visa from us, United States, we only recognize you as a citizen of this country under the E2 treaty visa if you've been domiciled for 3 years in that country, if you got the citizenship by investment. So that's an example of not the whole person's citizenship being challenged. It's this particular benefit, E2 in the United States. The problem is, if you look at that just in a vacuum, you might say, well, that's not a big deal to me. I don't care. I never wanted an E2 visa, in the United States anyway. But the thing is, I think you have to look as a consumer, as a sovereign individual, you have to look at all mobility benefits, especially springboard mobility benefits, as being accumulation. It's cumulative. It's accumulation of all these types of, things, visa-free access, treaty benefits, treaty visa benefits, whatever. And the more pockmarks you start putting into those, your citizenship, your springboard citizenship benefits will start looking like a piece of Swiss cheese, And I think that's the way we're headed. I think that's the trend we're seeing, right? Which is more and more countries are becoming emboldened to say, how'd you get that citizenship? You got that citizenship by investment? Okay, here's an extra requirement. Here's an extra limitation. Here's an extra whatever. And so I look at the fragility issue as two parts. One is the fragility of the actual citizenship itself. So the willingness and ability of the CBI country to take back the citizenship, to rescind it because of whatever, okay, your conduct or you bringing them or the program into disrepute. That's category one. So let's call that wholesale loss of citizenship. And then the second part of the fragility question is that little, the little picking off of the springboard mobility benefits across the world, okay, by virtue of you trying to get the benefit by being a citizen by investment. And that goes back to the example that I just said with the US E2. So yeah, this is where it's headed. I made a tweet, I think it was yesterday or the day before. And the more I study this, the more I look at this, and obviously, look at my own consults and cases, the more I believe that the main value proposition over the long term of CBIs is going to turn on the benefits that are the mobility benefits that are difficult for other countries to strip away from the person. So not visa-free access. Visa-free access is very easy to strip away, okay? Satellite residency rights, very easy to strip away. I think that the benefits that are difficult for third-party countries to strip away is going to be, first and foremost, immediate highest right of entry and residency in the country of citizenship, the citizenship by investment, right? It's hard for the United States to say, to St. Kitts, you gave this person citizenship by investment in St. Kitts for $250,000. We don't want that person to be able to enter and reside in St. Kitts. That's just very difficult, no matter how big a delta in the power between the countries. That's just difficult, okay? And really, really stretches the boundaries of like what's considered acceptable in diplomacy for a country to try to do that. So that's number one. And then number two, issuance of a valid passport that's widely recognized as legal ID and a travel document, right? That does require cooperation from other countries, but we see generally, even with countries that are antagonistic to CBI, I've not really seen much that they try to say, "Oh, you're a CBI, citizen by investment. We don't even recognize this passport as a travel document." They might say, "We're not going to give you visa-free access to our country, okay, because you got the citizenship by investment," but just non-recognition of the actual document. I think that's going to be pretty robust on the long run. So I'm seeing this, I don't know. I believe that these are the two, what I called kind of more core benefits of CBI that are going to be more resistant to degradation from third countries. And I don't know how valuable over the long term. I don't know how valuable the issuance of the passport is going to be. Right now, it's very valuable, right? Because you need, in our nation state system, it's generally accepted. The default is you need a valid passport or a substitute to cross borders, right? There's exceptions to that, but that's the default. In 20, 30 years, maybe we're not going to have a passport system. I don't know. So the value of that second benefit, is a question mark in my opinion. And then that would leave the first benefit, right? Which is, if you're getting a CBI, make sure you're getting it because you value a place that you can go have highest immediate right of entry. But anyway, anybody have any thoughts on the future of CBI with all these little attacks? Anybody disagree or see it differently than what I just said?
Well, I want to ask for another opinion. So you've talked about one of the I guess weaknesses of a CBI is that it doesn't require any extensive period of residency, typically. Do you think that same weakness could be applied to the robustness of citizenships that are granted by exception without residency or distant descent? So some ones that pop to mind, for example, are the Spanish and Portuguese descent from Sephardic Jews from centuries ago, or Benin's. I think it's a citizenship by recognition is what they're calling it. That anyone with transatlantic slave ancestry could be eligible for. Are those also at risk?
Excellent question. So before I answer the question, first I want to just talk about how I see and how I think other people should see a citizenship, right? Any citizenship. If you the recognition of your citizenship is diffused. Okay, and what I mean by that is, if a country grants you citizenship, yes, in fact, you have that citizenship, right? Because each country, generally the principle is every country decides who's a citizen or not a citizen of their country. But that doesn't mean that another country has to recognize that citizenship. That doesn't mean that an agency in another country has to recognize that citizenship. So the recognition of a person's citizenship is diffused and decentralized. So I invite people to look at the citizenship itself, the practical existence of the citizenship itself, as well as the benefits of it, as being dependent on how much it's recognized. Okay, so the question is, are you a citizen of X country, right? In the eyes of X other country, Y country, and for the purposes of, Z purpose, okay, whatever it is. So, I look at the quality of somebody having a citizenship for the purposes of benefits as being dependent on the country that you're relying on to actually give you access to that benefit. So easy example is visa-free access, right? So I could be a citizen of XYZ country that has, visa-free access to a third country, but that requires the third country to recognize you as that citizen, right? And countries don't have to do that, okay? And we're already starting to see a little bit that some countries are going to exercise that ability to not do it. So that's, first of all, the framework, the way I think about it. To answer your question, David, absolutely, I think that this could be a threat to other types of citizenship. First on my list would be citizenship by exception, okay, or merit. Now, the citizenship by merit doesn't have the drawback of monetary association that a lot of people find distasteful, especially a lot of like leftist elements in democracies, and it just pisses them off, the idea that somebody pays amount of money and they get the citizenship. And so maybe you don't have as much of that element, okay, when a person is applying for and being granted citizenship by merit, especially if it's based off of something other than a monetary investment, like you're a great author or you're a great advocate or something like that. But but I do see the attack vector, this concept of genuine links from the Notabomb case, which seems not to die, right? Which is, an attack vector of saying, hey, you granted your citizenship to this person based off of a merit. They've never lived in the country. Maybe they've never been in the country. Maybe they went to the country for the first time just to receive the citizenship. We're not going to recognize that, right? So yeah, I definitely think that that's an attack vector for citizenship by merit, a potential future attack vector. Distant CBDs, I see less so, okay, as a concern, because there is a tie, albeit maybe it's generationally, right? But remember, I mean, there's still a number of countries that primarily use sanguinis, okay, which is basically right of blood. So that's not a foreign concept. That's very much a foundational concept of citizenship in many countries. So I see that you know the lack of any type of residency as generally less of an attack vector to CBDs, but it could happen as well. But yeah, it's a great question. Absolutely great question, David.
Yeah, I'll also chime in here. I think, I think there is a potential future timeline, to borrow a Gen Z phrase, um, where some of these CBIs, if they face enough scrutiny, become more like citizenship by exception or citizenship by merit, where the criteria becomes a black box, and maybe there's investment involved, but you don't know about it. There's no set fixed fee. The relationship you have as an individual to the government that sponsors that program, is a factor. Uh, I see that there's a potential for that to happen because it makes a CBI less transactional. Um, but I will also add some notes here as it relates to kind of citizenship by descent. Um, One of these times we should get into the history of it because it's kind of interesting. But yeah, the concept of sanguinis, or in Italian, iure sanguini, is actually originally comes from Napoleon, because that's why most of continental Europe uses this principle for citizenship, because it was a way to redefine the relationship between an individual and their government. Because prior to Napoleon, under the French Bourbons, they were a subject. and not a citizen. And you see that in the UK, United Kingdom, British citizens today were technically subjects before 1983, which is shockingly late in this world, right, of citizenship recognition. So usually those citizenship ties have this historical foundation, which is why the citizenship by descent can go back multiple generations. On top of that, a lot of times it's a reflection of domestic politics as well, right? So the idea that like a country that sends a lot of people as migrants or emigrates, emigrants. I don't know if that's the noun, but emigration, like Italy, like Spain, there's an incentive for them to recognize those historical ties. But a country that takes in immigrants a lot more, those tend to be jus soli by virtue of soil. That's the United States. It's Canada. Most of Latin America is like that. So um, in examples like Spain and Portugal, you know, one generation after they both came out of authoritarian governments, there was a call to recognize the injustices against the Jewish communities in those countries, even though it was 400 years ago, 500 years ago. And so those programs are a reflection of that policy to accommodate domestic interests in the country. And so I think, looking at the future of citizenship, whatever slice or flavor it takes, it always, it's always beneficial to take into account the domestic politics of that country, because whatever the trend is in citizenship and how people see themselves as citizens of that country, that'll likely play forward in policy and be reflected in their citizenship policies.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great point, Patrick. You got to look at domestic attack vectors, right? Which is, what if the own populace of that country starts turning on a group of people that acquired citizenship by a certain method, and then starts putting pressure on the government, right, to restrict or to rescind or to start looking at old applications with a microscope. And then number two, method, and start saying, no, we don't recognize you as that. Hypothetical, like, let's just use some easy numbers, right? What's more attractive long term? So assuming you have the money, but you value your money, okay? Let's say assuming you have net worth in the $2 to $10 million range. What's more attractive? A citizenship that you pay, and let's just make it a whole number, $300,000 for, okay, that has visa-free access to 50 or 60 more countries, okay, and potential satellite residency, okay. But as we know by now, I hope everybody knows, those things can go away. And the trend is to attack those springboard benefits. So that citizenship on one end, or another citizenship, let's call it the Toyota Corolla citizenship, okay, gets you from point A to point B, $100,000, okay. Very poor visa-free access, let's say 50, 60 fewer countries, okay, no satellite residency, okay, but you have secure right of entry to that country, and the country reliably issues 10-year validity passports. Which is more attractive, generally speaking, to the market on the long term, right? I don't know. I think it's, well, I'm not going to say I don't know. I have an opinion. I think it's the latter. I think it's the secondary, okay, over the long term. I think it's more attractive to buy something that says, buy something from a person that says, I own this house. For this money, you can come into this house, okay, whenever it is you want, versus somebody else that says, give me triple that money. You get access to my house, and I'll give you access to the house of the guy next door. Well, the house of the next guy next door is not owned by that guy. Okay, that's owned by somebody else. And that guy in the house next door who owns the house next door could say, no, we don't want to give you access anymore. So that's selling something that's a fragile mobility benefit. And this is, assuming a country can be secure in securing the rights, or can be reliable in securing the rights domestically of its citizens by investment. I think it's a very interesting proposition, especially these lower priced CBIs, even if it's an African country, right? And in that case, in my opinion, the market shifts more towards doomsday mobility preppers, people who want to have a place that they know they can securely go to get out of town if necessary, that's securely going to give them a passport, they wouldn't, that market is not looking to that CBI, that low cost CBI, as their ticket to see the world. They're looking at it as like a backstop, okay, to basically have a place to go, or permanently or temporarily, or as a bridging residency or whatever. And yeah, I believe that's going to be a trend. Any thoughts on that, Alex, David, or Patrick, or Jay?
Yeah, so I would generally agree that the benefits of that latter citizenship are much more stable, because they're selling access to that particular country, which is something that they can reliably give. When you're buying a passport, let's say you're buying one of the many Caribbean programs, passports and citizenships, to some degree, a lot of people who are interested in that, they're looking to get visa-free access to third countries, and that's not something that's reliably available necessarily. It can be taken away on a whim by the European Union or by the UK or by other countries that this prospective client would like to go and visit. So it's an inherently fragile proposition for Caribbean countries that are transparently offering that by investment. I do think, though, that if countries, as Patrick said, are going to obscure the requirements for investment and change their programs to citizenship by exception, that could help to preserve those benefits for their customers. But I do think that in the long term, the $80,000 to $100,000 programs are potentially going to be more attractive, especially if more countries like Botswana, that are relatively big countries, places that are democratic, that have rule of law, that aren't just going to imprison anybody on a whim or take away their citizenship, try to revoke it on a whim, to have some kind of due process involved in that. I think that is a much more stable long-term solution to somebody's issue, if they're worried about their country not letting them in, their original country, for whatever reason. Oh, additionally, when talking about citizenship by descent in Europe, there's a case for that, Micheletti, about an Argentine Italian who, his citizenship, Spain did not want to recognize him as an Italian citizen, and he was able to get the benefits after a court case. That's now precedent in the EU. Other countries, I wouldn't be able to say, but what do you guys think?
I will have to dig into it. I know that there is, how do I put this in a nice way? There is an element when it comes to old documents, things are very inconsistent and names can be spelled slightly different sometimes, particularly before World War II in Europe, if someone was born out of wedlock or something scandalous like that happened at the time, the documents can sometimes not be clear and sometimes not exist, right? That's true in the United States. Like, one of my grandmas never had a birth certificate, which is like shocking because she was born in the 20th century. And so that gives some grounds for people to create documents or obfuscate documents to such an extent that they can be used in a citizenship by descent case. And I think you see that with Italy. Theoretically, before the recent change, you could go back to 1866, which was the foundational. That's when Italy was unified in 1861, but as a form of government, it was 1866, right? So you could go back as far then. documents from 1866 are going to be a little bit wild. And I suspect in this case, it might have been something around that because, you know, Italy is a, how do I put this in nice terms, is very inconsistent when it comes to the legal system and very bureaucratic. And so if one part of the government recognizes your citizenship that it normally would not have been recognized in another part of the citizenship, well, then a second country, Spain in this case, might take issue with your citizenship, particularly if you are trying to live and work in Spain, which I presume is what was happening here, given that he was from Argentina.
Yes, he was trying to practice a profession in Spain that gave preferential treatment to Italian citizens.
Oh, interesting. Okay. That is very interesting. There's also some politics there too, I'm sure. Spain is very prideful about being Spanish, but Argentinians are very prideful in being Italian. So if you are a Spanish-speaking Argentinian living in Spain, saying you're Italian, I can understand why some policymakers might be rubbed the wrong way. But I wonder if this case is reflective of a low-grade trend, but this is just the one visibility, like one aspect of visibility with it. I will say that generally speaking, citizenship by descent is relatively straightforward if you're coming from the United States, but you do face more hurdles obtaining citizenship by descent if you're from Latin America, because Europe tends to, for lack of a better word, just look down on Latin Americans in a way that they do not to Americans or Canadians. And so, if you get citizenship by descent and you're originally from Latin America, you know that you're going to face hurdles.
Yeah, Jay. So Micheletti case is not that recent, right? It's been around for I think about 30 years. I think CBD in Europe, in the European Union, is fairly secure for now. But the bottom line is, Micheletti had to appeal to a higher court, right, when he was denied recognition of his Italian citizenship, right? In a situation, let's say that was not in the European Union, in a situation in which that was a country that let's say answers at the highest level to their own Supreme Court. Let's say like the United States, for example. If that was the case, well then tough luck for Micheletti, right? Like it goes back to the concept that I said before, which I think people kind of understand it on its face, but I don't think people really understand how deep the concept goes, which is every country decides whether they recognize your citizenship of another country or not, and they decide for what purposes they recognize that other citizenship, right? So luckily for Micheletti, the Italy and Spain were part of the European Union, and Micheletti could have recourse to the Court of Justice of the European Union, and of course he won his case. But that's because judicially, right? There's a level above the Spanish Supreme Court there, right? So that's an interesting case. That's one of the bedrock cases, right? Regarding genuine links and this concept of recognition of citizenship in third countries. Especially when the person didn't have, let's call it like the prototypical profile, born in the country, a citizen, raised up, lived their whole life or most of their life in the country. All right, so it's 12:17 Pacific Standard Time. We've been going for about an hour and 15 minutes. It's been a good discussion here. Any last things anybody wants to bring up before we open up for suggestions for the topic for our next space? Okay, sounds like that's we've handled everything that we need to handle for today. Okay, we're fast coming up on 50 mobility spaces. This is number 41, Thursday, 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. We're going to do number 42. At the end of 50 spaces, I'm going to assess and figure out what I want to do as far as this format. I might continue the way we do it like this. I might change the format a little bit. I've been thinking about having this be just a podcast, and we center each podcast around a guest that is focused on the topic. Right now, the way I've been doing it basically is we pick a topic and then I kind of start myself, and then I open up to questions and discussions. And It might, these sessions might flow a little bit better if I have somebody who's kind of like a main guest related to that particular topic when we have a space. So I'm not sure what I'm going to do. I may actually do both. I may continue the spaces. Maybe I'll drop it down to just once a week after number 50, and also do a podcast in which I focus on a particular guest. So something to keep in mind if anybody has any suggestions or what they think with regards to what form these mobility spaces can take or should take going forward, I'd love to hear it. Now, what should we talk about for our next space topic number 42? And I confess I don't have anything to start with here. So if anybody has any suggestions, come forth and mention them. Otherwise, I'll just think about it for the rest of the day, and then I'll put up a poll as I always do.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I don't, there was a handful of, there's a poll you posted last week that had a handful of really good topics, and some of them are escaping me at the moment. I know one of them was Canada's C3 bill, which is currently changing weekly because of it's in committee. But there was a couple other ones as well that were all pretty topical. So after this, I'm gonna go back and look at that poll because I think you had some good ones on there.
I
We
like the
could talk
Canada topic.
about. Sorry.
Go ahead, please.
Oh,
Go ahead, Jay.
we could do a space on genuine links. Why those are important. What those look like.
Yeah, that's doable. Okay, so we got one vote for genuine links, one for Canada C3. Anybody else?
I like the genuine links idea. Canada C3 is a great topic, but I would rather discuss that after the dust settles a bit.
Here's a poll I put up on October 2nd. I'm not sure if this is the one that Patrick was referring to, but I had one topic as the rise of ETAs, so electronic travel authorizations. Botswana's new CBI, that's the one that won the poll, and we already did a space on that. Number 3, speech and movement. This is one I've been wanting to talk about. So free speech. Everybody's talking online now, and what's the future look like as far as people being denied entry or visas, or being even removed based off of their speech, as we've seen in the United States in the first 6 months of this Trump admin. And then number 4, citizenship and passport. So another space talking about citizenship and passport, the concepts, how we think about them, how they interface, because they are separate things. They are separate things. And I'm not sure if anybody's ever heard me say that before. I know I don't mention it that often, but citizenship and passport, in fact, are two different things. So those are some topics there. Okay, anybody else want to put forth a suggestion? You could put forth more than one too. It's fine. I'm just going to slap together a poll with what people mention here, and then we'll let the interwebs guide us.
Yeah, I'll also add in one more thing here, and that is I'm totally okay with waiting for dust to settle on C3 before talking about it. And then the other one on that poll you mentioned was languages, the freedom of movement, which I don't know if we've ever delved into the languages aspect of it, but I think it could also overlap with, ties to a country as well.
Yeah, absolutely right. And some countries even make a language requirement a condition for not just citizenship, but citizenship by descent, right? We've seen that before. Hungarian simplified naturalization. Edserushitet honoshitashi. You have to know Hungarian to get it. So that's a good topic. Okay, I like all these topics. So thank you everybody who suggested one. I'm going to put I think it was 4. I'm going to put all 4 on a poll, and we'll probably get to all. How we do it. We'll probably get to all 4. It's just a matter of the order. So that's it. I want to thank everybody for participating, including, of course, our anonymous listeners, and have a great week. Keep an eye out for the poll for our next Mobility Spaces topic. And of course, keep an eye out for the announcement of our next Mobility Space. Make sure to join us for Mobility Space number 42, this Thursday, 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, as usual. Thank you, everybody.